Most people spend years trying to figure out the narcissist. They read every article they can find, they join online communities, they stay awake at 3 in the morning, replaying old conversations again and again, searching for the exact moment when everything began to change. They want to understand why someone who once claimed to love them could treat them like an object, or why someone who promised safety, comfort, and loyalty slowly became the very person they needed protection from. And the painful truth that almost nobody tells you early enough is this: understanding a narcissist will not rescue you. Studying every pattern will not automatically set you free. And trying to beat them by using the same tactics they use will almost never work, because they have been playing this emotional game for years. They have spent a lifetime learning how to manipulate, control, confuse, and pull emotional reactions from other people, long before you ever became part of their story. You are not simply dealing with someone who behaves badly from time to time. You are dealing with deeply established patterns designed to pull attention toward them and away from you. Their goal may not always be conscious, but the effect is often the same. Your peace becomes disturbed. Your confidence becomes weaker. Your identity starts getting pushed into the background, but there is something they desperately do not want you to understand. What truly weakens their influence does not look like revenge. It does not look like screaming, exposing them online, or finally winning one of the endless arguments they keep creating. What actually breaks their hold is much quieter, much calmer, and far more lasting. It begins with psychological changes inside you that remove the foundation their control depends on. Once you understand that foundation, you begin to recognize where your power has been all along. Not in anger, not in cruelty, not in trying to hurt them back. Your power is in clarity, and in the next few minutes you're going to see exactly what that means. Because these changes can completely alter the way you experience the relationship. This is not about becoming cold like them. It is not about manipulating them, playing emotional games, or learning how to hurt them more effectively. It is about removing yourself from the cycle that keeps giving their behavior power over your emotional state. Think about what happens when someone has learned that your reactions are predictable. They know what makes you explain yourself. They know what makes you chase. Or they know what makes you defend your character. They know what makes you apologize even when you did nothing wrong. They learn which words make you angry and which words make you afraid of losing them. Over time, they can begin pressing those emotional buttons almost automatically, but something changes when those buttons stop working. The same accusation no longer sends you into a long explanation. The same silent treatment no longer makes you panic. The same sudden affection no longer convinces you that everything has magically changed. The same argument no longer becomes a 3-hour attempt to prove your innocence. That is where the shift begins. And you may be surprised by how powerful a simple emotional step backward can become. When you stop feeding the cycle, you are not defeating another person. You are ending their access to the version of you they learned how to control. That difference matters. Because the goal is not to destroy them. The goal is to stop destroying yourself. Keep listening, because the deeper you understand this pattern, the easier it becomes to recognize why your withdrawal from the cycle can affect them so strongly. What follows is not a revenge strategy. It is a way of reclaiming your own emotional authority. Before we go further, you need to understand one important idea. The narcissist does not function psychologically in the way most people imagine. Beneath the confidence, beneath the arrogance, and beneath the carefully created image they show other people, there can be deep insecurity, shame, fear of rejection, and an unstable sense of self. What you see on the outside may look powerful, but appearances can be very different from what is happening underneath. Many narcissistic patterns develop as ways of protecting a fragile self-image. Painful emotions become difficult to tolerate, so the person creates a stronger image of themselves. They may begin building a role around being special, superior, untouchable, always right, or always in control. Eventually, that role can become so important that they depend on other people to keep confirming it. The performance needs an audience. Without attention, admiration, fear, pursuit, approval, or emotional reactions, the image becomes harder to maintain. This is why their behavior can change so dramatically when someone stops responding in the expected way. They may become angry, they may become distant, they may suddenly become charming again. They may accuse you of changing. They may tell you that you are selfish, heartless, confused, or cruel. But underneath those reactions can be one simple problem. They are no longer receiving the response they became accustomed to receiving from you. And this is where many people make their biggest mistake. They see the reaction and assume they need to explain themselves better. They think, if I can just make them understand, everything will settle down. But sometimes more explaining only creates another opening for the cycle to continue. The more you explain, the more material they have to argue with. The more you defend yourself, the more they can move the conversation somewhere else. Suddenly, you are no longer discussing what happened. You are defending your right to be upset about what happened. And that is exactly how the conversation becomes another trap. Every time you reacted strongly to their moods, you gave their behavior emotional importance. Every time you changed your plans because you were afraid of their reaction, their influence became stronger. Every time you cried, pleaded, defended yourself, apologized, or fought for hours to be understood, you showed them that they still had access to your emotional center. This does not mean your emotions were wrong, your feelings were real, your pain was real, your confusion was real. But there is a difference between having an emotion and allowing another person's behavior to control what you do next. That distinction can change everything. Imagine someone repeatedly pushing the same button because they know exactly what will happen when they press it. Now imagine that the button still exists, but it no longer controls the machine. The person can press it, they can complain that it used to work, or they can press harder, they can try another button. But the system no longer responds the way it once did. That is what emotional detachment can look like. You still notice what is happening, you still understand the behavior, you simply stop handing it the power to dictate your next move. And this is why emotional distance can feel so threatening to someone who depends heavily on controlling the emotional atmosphere around them. They are used to being able to create tension and then watch you rush in to repair it. They are used to creating confusion and then watching you search for answers. They are used to pulling away and seeing you chase. When you stop doing that, the old pattern loses its fuel. The silence feels different. The argument feels different. Their criticism lands differently. Not because you suddenly stopped caring about everything, but because you stopped treating every emotional disturbance as an emergency. And that is a powerful change. In fact, this may be one of the most important shifts you can make if you want to understand why their influence begins to weaken. The first major change is simple: stop reacting immediately. This sounds easy, but it can be incredibly difficult when you have spent months or years living in emotional alertness. You may feel that you have to answer every accusation. You may feel that if you do not respond right away, they will misunderstand you. You may believe that silence means weakness. But there is a difference between healthy communication and compulsive reaction. Healthy communication happens because you choose to communicate. Compulsive reaction happens because someone has pushed an emotional button and you feel you have no choice but to respond. The moment you create space between what they do and what you do next, something important happens. You regain choice. Instead of responding from fear, anger, guilt, or panic, you can pause, you can breathe. You can ask yourself, does this actually require a response? Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it is no. That simple question can protect you from hours of unnecessary conflict. If they send a message designed to provoke you, you do not have to answer immediately. If they make an accusation that makes no sense, you do not have to spend the entire night proving that it makes no sense. If they suddenly become cold because you set a boundary, you do not have to chase them into warmth. Let the emotion exist without immediately trying to fix it. This is where many people discover something surprising. The more you stop reacting, the more clearly you can see the pattern. When you are inside the emotional storm, every event feels unique. Every argument feels like a new crisis. But when you step back, you begin noticing repetition. The same accusations, the same timing, the same withdrawal, the same sudden return. the same promises, the same cycle. And once you see the cycle, it becomes much harder for the cycle to control you. Stay with this, because the next shift goes even deeper. It is not simply about reacting less. It is about changing what you believe you owe this person. The second major change is to stop over-explaining yourself. This is one of the hardest habits to break, because emotionally healthy people often believe communication can solve almost anything. So when someone misunderstands them, they explain. When someone accuses them, they explain. When someone twists their words, they explain again. They keep adding details, examples, evidence, screenshots, memories, and reasons, hoping that eventually the other person will finally say, "Now I understand." But what happens when the other person is not actually trying to understand? Your explanation becomes another battlefield. They can challenge one sentence, then another, then another. Suddenly you are defending yourself against a completely different accusation than the one that started the conversation. This is why endless explanations can become exhausting. You are trying to reach a conclusion with someone who keeps changing the subject. You think you are communicating, but you are actually trying to earn permission to trust your own experience. And you do not need permission for that. You are allowed to say, "That does not work for me." You are allowed to say, "I remember what happened differently." You are allowed to say, "I am not continuing this conversation while we are speaking to each other this way." You are allowed to step away. You do not have to submit a courtroom presentation every time you establish a boundary. The less you feel compelled to prove yourself, the less material there is for someone to twist into another argument. And this is not about being rude, it is about being clear. Short answers can be powerful because they close doors that long explanations leave open. When you stop trying to convince someone who has already decided how they want to see you, you begin conserving emotional energy. That energy can then return to the places where it belongs: your work, your health, your goals, your friendships, your family, your peace, and your own sense of self. And that leads directly into the third shift, because once you stop explaining everything, you can finally begin rebuilding something that may have been slowly taken from you. The third change is to stop making their opinion the measurement of your worth. This may be the deepest shift of all. When you have been criticized, blamed, compared, dismissed, or constantly made to feel like you are not enough, you can slowly begin seeing yourself through their eyes. You start asking, am I selfish? Am I difficult? Was I too sensitive? Did I cause this? Maybe I really am the problem. That is how emotional control can continue even when the person is not physically present. Their voice moves inside your head. Their judgments become your inner dialogue. You begin policing yourself before they even have to say anything. But you have to recognize what is happening. Someone else's opinion of you is not an objective measurement of your character. It is one person's perception. And sometimes that perception is shaped by their own needs, fears, insecurities, or desire to maintain control. You do not have to accept every label placed on you. You do not have to prove that you are a good person to someone committed to seeing you as the villain. This does not mean refusing accountability. Healthy accountability is important. If you make a mistake, own it. Apologize when an apology is appropriate. Learn, grow, change what genuinely needs to change. But do not confuse accountability with accepting blame for everything. Those are not the same thing. One helps you mature, the other slowly erases you. The moment you begin measuring yourself by your own values instead of someone else's changing approval, something inside you becomes steadier. Their praise does not make you feel worthy. Their criticism does not make you worthless. Their attention becomes something you can receive without needing it to survive emotionally. And when that happens, their ability to control your self-image begins to shrink. This is where your freedom becomes real, because you are no longer asking, how do I make them see my value? You are asking, do I see my own value clearly enough to stop begging someone else to confirm it? The fourth change is perhaps the most powerful. Stop chasing closure from the person who created the confusion. This is where so many people remain trapped. They believe they need one final conversation, one honest apology, or one admission, one moment when the other person finally says, yes, I hurt you, yes, I lied, yes, I manipulated the situation, yes, you were right. They imagine that hearing those words will finally allow them to heal. But what if those words never come? What if the person refuses to admit what happened? What if they rewrite the story forever? What if they tell other people that you were the problem? What if they move on as though nothing happened? If your healing depends on their honesty, you have placed your freedom in their hands. Closure is not always something another person gives you. Sometimes closure is the decision to stop waiting for an explanation that may never satisfy you. You can know what happened without receiving their confession. You can recognize a pattern without getting their agreement. You can accept that someone treated you badly without needing them to officially certify that it happened. This is difficult because the mind wants a complete story. It wants every missing piece. But some relationships end without satisfying explanations. Some questions never receive answers, and eventually you have to decide whether continuing to search for those answers is helping you heal or keeping you emotionally connected to the person who hurt you. The moment you stop chasing closure, you stop giving them one final piece of control. You stop checking whether they understand. You stop wondering whether they regret it. You stop waiting for the apology that will magically make everything make sense. And something beautiful can happen then. Your attention slowly returns to you. You begin thinking about tomorrow instead of replaying yesterday. You begin building instead of analyzing. You begin living instead of constantly investigating. There is another important piece that people often miss. Emotional detachment does not mean you stop having feelings. It does not mean you become heartless. It does not mean you pretend you were never hurt. In fact, healthy detachment often requires you to feel your emotions more honestly because you are no longer spending all your energy trying to get another person to change them. You can be angry without sending the message. You can be sad without begging them to comfort you. You can miss someone without returning to the same unhealthy cycle. You can love someone and still decide that access to you is no longer safe or healthy. Those truths can exist together. This is why strength does not always look dramatic. Sometimes strength looks like putting your phone down. Sometimes it looks like not replying to a provocative message. Sometimes it looks like leaving the room instead of proving your point. Sometimes it looks like refusing to argue about your own reality. Sometimes it looks like spending an evening doing something meaningful while someone else is waiting for you to react. And this is the part many people discover too late. Peace can feel unfamiliar after prolonged emotional chaos. At first, calm may feel like emptiness. You may even wonder why you are not checking your phone every few minutes. You may wonder why you are not thinking about them constantly. That is not necessarily a sign that you stopped caring. It may be a sign that your nervous system is finally learning that it does not need to stay on alert. Your life does not have to revolve around predicting another person's mood. You do not have to wake up wondering which version of them you will meet today. You do not have to spend your entire day managing someone else's emotions. And the more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. Keep listening because there is one final realization that can make all four changes much easier to maintain. The real victory is not watching the narcissist fall apart. The real victory is realizing that their emotional state is no longer your responsibility. This is an important distinction because it is easy to become obsessed with whether your silence is affecting them. You may start checking their social media. You may wonder whether they miss you. You may ask mutual friends what they are saying. You may secretly hope they are suffering because now they understand what they lost. But be careful. If your entire recovery becomes focused on whether they are hurting, you are still emotionally connected to them. The focus has simply changed from how do I get them to love me to how do I make them regret losing me. Both questions keep them at the center. Real freedom sounds different. It sounds like I do not need to know what they are thinking. I do not need to know whether they regret it. I do not need to know whether they are watching. I do not need to know whether they found someone else. I need to know what I am building now. That is the shift. You stop measuring your healing by their reaction and start measuring it by your own peace. Maybe they never admit what they did. Maybe they tell a completely different story. Maybe they appear happy. Maybe they try to return. None of those things have to determine your future. Your job is not to monitor their emotional consequences. Your job is to protect your emotional freedom. And once you understand this, their attempts to pull you back into the old dynamic begin to look different. The sudden kindness becomes something you can observe without immediately trusting it. The sudden anger becomes something you can recognize without absorbing it. The accusations become something you can hear without automatically defending yourself. The silence becomes something you can tolerate without chasing. The entire pattern becomes less mysterious because you are no longer standing in the middle of it. And that is why what weakens their control is not revenge. It is your refusal to participate in the same cycle. It is your ability to remain calm when they expect panic. It is your ability to remain grounded when they create confusion. It is your willingness to let someone misunderstand you rather than spending hours trying to force them to understand you. It is your decision to stop seeking your worth from someone who keeps moving the finish line. It is your courage to walk away from conversations that only leave you smaller. It is your willingness to accept that not every relationship can be repaired simply because you love someone. And perhaps most importantly, it is your decision to stop making their behavior the center of your life. You do not need to defeat them. You do not need to expose every secret. You do not need to win every argument. Or you do not need to prove that you were the good person and they were the bad person. You need to become unavailable for the pattern that was hurting you. That is a completely different kind of power. It is quiet. It does not need an audience. It does not need applause. It does not need revenge. You simply stop participating. And when you do, you may notice something happening inside yourself that is even more important than anything happening inside them. Your mind becomes quieter. Your decisions become clearer. Your confidence begins returning. Your attention comes back. Your identity starts feeling like yours again. You remember what you enjoyed before the relationship became your entire emotional world. You begin making plans that have nothing to do with them. You begin imagining a future that does not require their approval. That is the real crack in the old dynamic, not their pain, your freedom. So if you are currently trying to understand every move this person makes, pause for a moment. Ask yourself a different question. Instead of asking, why are they doing this? Ask, why am I still allowing their behavior to determine my emotional state? Instead of asking, how can I make them realize what they lost? Ask, what part of myself have I been neglecting while trying to keep this relationship alive? Instead of asking, will they come back? Ask, if they came back exactly as they are today, would I honestly want the same cycle again? Those questions change the direction of your life. They move your attention away from decoding another person and back toward understanding yourself. And that is where real healing begins. You may never fully understand why they did what they did. You may never receive the apology you deserved. You may never hear the truth from their mouth, but you can still know the truth of your own experience. You can still learn the lessons. You can still rebuild your boundaries. You can still become emotionally independent. You can still choose peace. And remember this, you do not have to become harder to become stronger. You do not have to stop caring to become free. You simply have to stop abandoning yourself in order to keep someone else comfortable. The moment you stop chasing, stop proving, stop explaining, stop monitoring, and stop begging for validation, the entire emotional equation changes. Their power decreases because your participation decreases, and your life gets bigger because their presence becomes smaller. That is not revenge, that is recovery. That is not cruelty, that is clarity. And if you remember only one thing from everything you heard today, remember this. The greatest way to weaken unhealthy control is not to fight harder. It is to become someone who no longer needs to fight at all. There is no stronger emotional reward for a person like this than knowing someone keeps revolving around them even while being hurt by them. That has always been the deeper pattern. And this is where the 4 methods begin, because each one targets a different part of what this kind of person depends on. The first method takes away their emotional power over you. The second challenges the false image they work so hard to protect. The third removes their access to your attention. The fourth cuts off the emotional supply they have become dependent on. Together, these methods do more than protect your peace. They slowly break apart the emotional system that has been built inside your thoughts, your reactions, your body, and your daily routine. None of this requires aggression. None of it requires screaming, revenge, or some dramatic confrontation. In fact, the calmer and more emotionally steady you become, the more effective these changes can be. Because anger is something they understand, or they know how to provoke anger. They know how to turn your anger into another argument. They know how to use your emotional reaction as proof that they still have influence. What becomes much harder for them to deal with is genuine emotional distance. What they struggle to process is a version of you that truly does not need them anymore. That version of you is not cruel. It is not heartless. It is not emotionally empty. It is simply free. And your freedom, especially when it is quiet, stable, and completely free of drama, can become one of the hardest things for them to accept. So everything begins at the foundation. It begins with something they may have been taking from you every single day without you fully realizing it. Your energy, your attention, your emotional focus, your mental space. You kept giving those things to someone who was not giving the same care back. And once you begin taking that energy back, the entire dynamic starts to change. Stay with me, because this first shift is deeper than simply ignoring someone. People with strong narcissistic patterns may not fear your anger as much as you think. They may not fear your tears. They may not even fear you leaving if they believe there is still a chance of pulling you back into the same cycle. What can be much harder for them to accept is becoming emotionally unimportant to you. Imagine you waking up one morning and realizing you no longer need to know what they are doing. You no longer need to check their mood. You no longer need to wonder whether they are thinking about you. Or you simply live, you make plans, you laugh, you grow, you build something peaceful, and eventually you go through an entire day without them entering your mind. That quiet possibility can feel deeply threatening to someone who became accustomed to occupying so much of your emotional world. Indifference is not the same as hatred. Hatred still requires attention. Indifference releases attention, and that is why your calm can become more powerful than your anger ever was. The first method begins with energy. More specifically, it begins with the emotional energy you have been losing to someone who was never going to return it in the same way. To understand why this matters, you need to look honestly at what was happening inside the relationship. Think about an ordinary day. The moment you opened your eyes, some part of your mind was already focused on them. You were watching, predicting, adjusting. You wondered what mood they would be in. You wondered whether yesterday's tension would continue into the morning. You carefully thought about whether you should speak first or remain quiet and wait for them to set the emotional tone. You were not simply living your morning. You were preparing for their reaction. You may have studied their face the way someone watches dark clouds gathering before a storm. You searched for small signs, a change in their voice, a different expression, a longer silence, a short answer. You were preparing yourself emotionally before anything had even happened. And you probably did not consciously choose this behavior. It slowly became automatic. Your nervous system learned that watching them closely felt safer than being surprised by them, so your mind stayed alert. Even during peaceful moments, part of you was still waiting for the next shift. That constant monitoring is exhausting, but it is also something more serious. It represents a steady transfer of your most valuable resources into another person's emotional world. Your attention, your thoughts, your focus, your mental space, your energy, all of it kept moving toward them throughout the day. Even when they were nowhere near you, they could still be present inside your mind. You could be working and thinking about them, sitting with friends and thinking about them, trying to sleep and replaying their words, attempting to relax while wondering what their silence meant.